Hello again. I'm pleased to be here today with Sarah Nicastro, the editor-in-chief of Field Technologies magazine. She writes content about what field service organizations are doing to optimize their fleets and their organizations overall. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So you've told me that you're particularly interested in the topic of the customer experience and what organizations are doing, so I'm excited to learn more about that. So please tell us what Field Technologies magazine writes about.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I am passionate about this topic. I think it's one of the biggest topics in the field service space right now. So at Field Technologies magazine, we reach field service businesses of all different shapes and sizes and management level and above. And we talk with those folks about all of the different things that are going on in the industry, challenges, trends, and we talk a lot specifically about different technologies that can help companies optimize their businesses. So we focus a lot on letting companies tell those stories themselves. So we've always heard feedback that field service organizations are most interested in learning from their peers. Yeah. So our editorial focus is very heavy on letting those companies tell their success stories, their challenges, talk about what their initiatives are and what all those things are that they're doing to make their businesses better and let them tell those stories. So that's kind of what we do.
I think that's really great. I feel like every industry should, or every organization for that matter, should have some sort of resource that they can go to that's got unbiased information that they can learn from. So I'm happy to hear that.
That's our goal.
That's the direction you guys take. So recently you've interviewed organizations about how measuring customer experience has become so important. Can you talk to me about why this is such an important topic now as opposed to ever before?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, if you really just think about how we live our lives and kind of the level of service we're accustomed to, you have things like Amazon and Uber and meal delivery and subscription and things just arrive at your doorstep and It's so convenient. So we live in that world of convenience and, customers of field service organizations have also become way more demanding. They expect those same things from their field service providers. So the whole level of service that we expect as consumers has continued to rise, and field service organizations, I think, are really recognizing a need to become more strategic about how they're delivering service to help better meet those expectations. Like, I think field service organizations realize that they need to kind of step their game up to stay relevant and to continue to win business.
Right. Yeah, our customers now are, like Steve Koch mentioned earlier today, are competing with some of these very large brands that they may have never realized they're actually competing with, like Disney or Amazon or Domino's even. He had a great story about Domino's and their transformation about the customer experience. Although you don't traditionally believe that you would ever compete with a company like this, the consumer expectation is changing so much that they're demanding that they get that same experience with such services as plumbing, landscaping, anything service related. Mm-hmm. So can you share with us what you've discovered in the interviews that you've had with organizations both large and small as to how they're tackling this shift of the customer experience focus?
Yeah, so I think the common themes are, the first one is they need to gather feedback from their customers on what it is they really want. Mm-hmm. So to be able to meet any sort of demand, you need to know what that demand is. So I think talking with their customer base and understanding exactly what it is they would like, not based on what they're accustomed to, but based on an ideal scenario, like really understanding what it is that those customers would enjoy and like them to do differently. So getting that feedback is the first step. The second step is really looking at where you are versus what they want, and then that is what's determining how much work you need to do, right? Sure. And where you need to take things, what your strategic plan is to get from where you are now to where you ultimately need to be. And then I think companies that are tackling this challenge are also working on measuring ongoing improvements, like having a baseline for where they're starting and measuring the customer satisfaction along the way to make sure that the changes that they're making in their business are having a positive impact and taking them in the right direction.
All right. So how do people and processes need to change in order to accomplish this?
Yeah, so I think people is the number one and arguably the most important step. So having your entire company on the same page is important, but your frontline employees, they're the ones that are interacting with your customers on a day-to-day basis. They're the ones that are in front of them, that are really the brand, representing the brand that your company is.
Yeah,
so
totally agree.
If you try and implement this change from the top down and say, hey, we're going to do things differently and just go do this thing, and they're not really bought into what that looks like or why you're doing that or what it means for them, that probably is going to prevent you from having the impact that you wanted to have. So really taking the first step of focusing on bringing them on board with that mission and really helping them understand why customer experience focus is important and how it's going to impact their jobs and their roles, and all of that is super important. Process-wise, it looks a little different for every company, because if you look at what your customers want from you, some companies are going to be closer to delivering that than others. Some are going to be starting a little bit further back. And so you really just have to look at what your end game is, which is what your customers want from you, and how far back you are from that. And from a process perspective, then you can kind of reverse engineer what you need to do to get better and deliver on that ideal customer experience. And that's what's going to help you, determine your strategy and your plan. So there was a conversation earlier about customer journey mapping.
Yeah.
That's a great example of a process, companies can go through to determine the specific changes they need to make. I wrote an article earlier this year with ServiceMaster. They own like Terminex and Mary Maids and companies like that. That's a process they went through. It was a huge company-wide initiative of theirs to really tackle customer experience and really transform their business to be more customer-centric. And they went through that customer journey mapping process, and they learned a lot. And that's how they kind of developed their strategy for how they needed to improve. So from a process perspective, that's a really good way to get a good grasp on where you are now versus where you need to go, so that you can be very intentional about what that plan is for getting to where you need to be.
Totally agree. GPS Insight does that as well, the customer journey mapping, and we've interviewed upwards of about 100 customers face-to-face to go through every single step and every touch point they've had with us in order to really understand what we're good at and what we're not so good at and where we need to improve. And that process has just been so enlightening. I highly recommend trying it if you haven't. So what about technology now? How does that play in?
Yeah, so technology, I think there's two different ways to look at how technology factors into this conversation. The first is how technology can help you to measure your customer satisfaction. So through things like customer surveys and Net Promoter Score and things along those lines, those tools can help you really measure how your customers feel about the service you're providing, so that you continue to know where you need to improve. That's one part. The second part is, technology is the major enabler of business transformation. So there's so many different technology options today for companies that can really help you to elevate the level of service you're providing, to make your operations more productive, more efficient, to really deliver more of what customers want. So everything from a mobile device with access to customer history and a field service software solution that helps you allow your technicians to arrive and be able to answer questions and get right to work and know what they're there for, and increase first-time fix rates and things like that. Telematics, I mean, obviously we live in a real-time world, and people can log on and see where their Amazon package is, but they can't log on to see where their field technician is, and that's kind of a disconnect. So things like that. And then, there's more advanced technologies that field service organizations are starting to implement as well, like IoT and augmented reality and things like that are just going to continue to take it further.
So can you tell me about that story of that presenter you listened to that spoke about NPS?
Yeah, so I was at a conference in April, and Kimberly Cooks from Comcast spoke about Net Promoter Score. And I loved her presentation because what she was talking about is that Net Promoter Score is a great tool. It gives you, data that is really important on how your customers feel about how you're doing, but it's just data, right? And so what she was talking about is turning Net Promoter Score into Net Promoter System. And so what Comcast has done is, made sure they have really strong processes and systems in place to deal with the data they have coming in. So, if they have a customer that has a negative experience, they ensure that someone follows up with them almost immediately someone that's very competent to handle that issue and hopefully resolve that issue to kind of turn that experience around. And they have a lot of different checks and balances in place to make sure that the data they have coming in is funneled in the right ways to the right people to make sure that it actually has an impact on their business. So I just thought that was really, really smart. Information is just information. Action is, what's going to make it have a positive impact on your business.
I think that that's such an interesting point that she made with turning a score into a system, because really what good is this score if you don't do something about it and turn it into some sort of action, right?
Right.
So GPS Insight does just that with empowering employees, like you mentioned, to take action, most of the time proactively, but of course reactively as well, in this situation where maybe a customer isn't happy, to respond as close to immediately as possible is really important, and empowering employees to really make a difference in that customer experience is invaluable. So what are some of the most common missteps?
So missteps. I think the first is that companies make assumptions about what it is their customers really want instead of putting the time or effort into asking those questions and really gathering that feedback directly. That can really be detrimental to a customer experience transformation because you might think but if you miss the mark just a little and then you take all these steps afterwards and try and enact all this change to meet what you think your customers want and you miss the mark, you wasted a lot of time and a lot of effort. So it's really worth putting the effort in up front to do that research, to have those conversations, and to really get a good understanding before you take any other steps of what it is your customers are looking for. That would be number one. Number two, like I said, for some companies, this is a bigger change than others. And so the companies that have kind of further to go on this journey or a bigger transformation to undertake, if they take on too much at once, they can get overwhelmed. They can start, doing things halfway instead of really seeing projects all the way through. And that can have a negative impact as well.
Overwhelming.
Yeah, overwhelming. And, if you start to have breakdowns in what you're trying to do and you're building on that, you have cracks kind of in the foundation. So I think companies need to just take it one step at a time. Start with the people, move on to the processes, layer on technology to help you improve the business, and just take it one step at a time. Focus on getting those wins, doing one chunk and doing it well, and then building on that success with the next layer. And then third, I think that companies underestimate the need for change management. A lot of people talk about change management and it seems like, oh yeah, we know we need to do that. And it can kind of get de-emphasized or deprioritized and overlooked a little bit. So I think change management, especially for those organizations for which this is a major transformation, is a crucial part of making sure that you arm your employees with all of the information they need on why you're doing what you're doing and how you're doing it. Give them an opportunity to give you feedback, all of those things. And taking the time to do that can really be the difference between the success and failure of the project. So having a good change management strategy is important. So
this is a really important topic, so I just want to make sure we got this all right in summary here. So the first misstep is assuming, right? Do not assume. There's an old adage I won't say, but it makes something out of you and me.
Yes.
You have to ask these people to their face what it is that they're expecting, right? If you assume you're probably way off the mark. So journey mapping is a great example on what you can do for that. Secondly, I think you said don't take on too much at once. So basically, don't drink out of the fire hose. You're going to overwhelm yourself and ultimately probably not be very good at this customer experience change you're trying to create. And thirdly, you said it ultimately comes down to how well management can implement this throughout the organization, right? You got to communicate well with all your employees. The employees need to buy into this, and there needs to be some sort of a feedback loop going on, so that as this change happens, the organization can maneuver with what works and what doesn't, right? Yeah. I mean, getting that feedback is so important because your frontline employees are the ones that are interacting with your customers on a day-to-day basis. So
you know what your customers want, but those frontline employees that are having those interactions can give you really, really good perspective on how the changes you're making are working, or different things you might want to try, or different paths you need to take. So it's not only important to go through that change management process for their benefit, but also for the company's benefit. They have valuable perspective to add.
So some of our customers right now are thinking to themselves, what's the payoff of doing all of this change? What's in it for me? Can you shed some light as to what key stakeholders need to know about this?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind when you ask that question is, I guess, reframing that a bit from what's the payoff to what will happen if I don't do this. So these levels of service that we're growing accustomed to continue, like the bar is getting higher and higher and higher. And that's not going to change. It's not going to stop. It's not going to move backwards. And so it's only going to continue to move forward, and a company's willingness to embrace that and move forward with that evolution is what's going to help them stay relevant and competitive. So I think it's not a question of what will I gain from doing this, but what will I lose from not doing this. That being said, the companies that I've talked with that have made this a priority and have completed transformations within their businesses, like ServiceMaster, typically do see good benefits. I think ServiceMaster saw double-digit NPS score gains with its projects. So there are tangible benefits to that focus, but it's almost like the opportunity cost of not doing it is kind of how you need to think about it.
So the opportunity cost is you really could lose customers if you don't do this. Your revenue, therefore, is affected because your competitors are now getting your business who have made this shift in focusing on the customer experience.
Right.
So money and reputation are a big part of this as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. So this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your
Thanks
insights.
for having me.
So the customer experience shift is here now. So if you're not jumping on top of this and starting to realize that you are competing with brands you may not have thought about before, like Disney and Amazon and the ones we've talked about today, you've got something coming. So please take this topic seriously, as it does affect your revenue. And we've talked a little bit today about the processes, the cultural shift that needs to take place, and the technology that needs to be adopted to get this done. We went over some of the missteps that organizations are taking, so please take those seriously as well and review those before you get started. And if there's any additional information you'd like to learn about this topic, Sarah's been nice enough to put together a PDF that's at the bottom of the screen that you guys can download to get more information. And if you're interested in Field Technologies Magazine, to subscribe, you can check out their website at fieldtechnologiesonline.com. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.